Thank you, Em. Welcome, everybody. Hi, nice to see everybody here. I'm Jefferson Nowicki. I'm a board member at Millay House Rockland, and I welcome you to the second Never Through Me Shall You Be Overcome poetry reading. And I'll run through our sponsors again because there were quite a few of them. We're hosted by Millay House Rockland and co-sponsored by Out Maine, Maine Women Writers Collection at the University of New England, Maine Humanities Council, and Rockland Public Library. The seed for this series came from the annual Edna St. Vincent Millay poetry reading at the Farnsworth that happens in February, which is one of the best poetry readings I think that happens throughout the state and always sells out. And at this, maybe it might have been a couple of years ago, the poet Gary Lawless recited Millay's Conscientious Objector poem from 1934. It's a short poem, so I'm just going to start by reading that to us all. Conscientious Objector. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. I hear the clatter on the barn floor. He is in haste. He has business in Cuba, business in the Balkans, many calls to make this morning. But I will not hold the bridle while he clinches the girth. And he may mount by himself. I will not give him a leg up. Though he flick my shoulders with his whip, I will not tell him which way the fox ran. With his hoof on my breast, I will not tell him where the black boy hides in the swamp. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I am not on his payroll. I will not tell him the whereabouts of my friends nor my enemies either. Though he promises me much, I will not map him the route to any man's door. Am I a spy in the land of the living that I should deliver men to death? Brother, the password and the plans of our city are safe with me. Never through me shall you be overcome. The title of our series is taken from that last line. And in the poem, Millay makes plain her allegiance to those under threat of violence and oppression and commits herself to solidarity and struggle. Particularly at this time of escalating threats and strife, we feel strongly that part of our responsibility in preserving Millay's legacy is to uplift LGBTQ+ voices and to offer a place of refuge and support for LGBTQ+ youth. In support of this series, I'd like to thank my colleagues on the Millay House board, specifically Michelle Gifford, who's here tonight, and former board member Kathy Onofrio for their enthusiastic assistance in helping me apply for the grant. And especially my partner, Sarah, whose great idea this was in the first place. So Robert Carr was born in Annapolis, Maryland in 1959. He is a graduate of Bates College, where he studied philosophy and was an active member of the Bates Dance Ensemble. In 1984, Robert moved to Boston, volunteered with the AIDS Action Committee, and became the first HIV testing counselor with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. In response to the HIV pandemic, Robert engaged in a 33-year career in public health and recently retired from the position of Deputy Director for the Bureau of Infectious Disease and Laboratory Sciences in Massachusetts. Of Robert Carr's previous book, The Unbuttoned Eye, the Sonora Review's John Riccio said, Carr has lyricized the queer corporal and described the poems as a summation of gay men's relationships to the AIDS landscape at its outset, battles intertwined with bedside vigils. Describing Robert's most recent book, The Heavy of Human Clouds, which he brought that and the Unbuttoned Eye with him tonight, the poet Sean Singer said, "Beauty is given generously in these poems. They are written in a language where everything is risky." And in his poem, Stargazing While Sedated, pain becomes transitional as rain-blown leaves. And the poem ends, "Looking skyward, I crack a shin on the corner of a slatted bench. Difficult, but forgettable. There will always be another collision, startled pinprick of long ago light, this knot pulsing over bone. I love how in this poem, pain is both immediate but also forgettable. There'll always be another collision. And finally, in his poem, not unlike my father, Robert writes, I dream in a 4-hour radius, New England coast anywhere between Gloucester and Belfast. I live most of my life at a distance from where I am. And we're lucky to have him here tonight with us in Rockland. Please welcome Robert Carr.
Thank you, Jefferson, and my deep appreciation to the sponsors of the reading. Preparing for tonight has been a real gift. It's given me the opportunity to think about the trajectory of poetry and the trajectory of poetry in my life. And as I was talking earlier with Jefferson and others, I started out in creative writing as a kid. And graduating from Bates College in 1982, that was really the beginnings of the HIV pandemic. And so I took a 32-year detour from writing the poems to really commit myself to responding to an infectious disease and ending up in the position with the unlikely title that Jefferson shared. Since the original book, The Unbuttoned Eye, which really does unpack the experience of HIV, particularly in the queer community, I've thought a lot about what it is that we get from the writing. What is it that we get from the poetry? And it's come down to something very, very simple for me, which is while we're here, to understand ourselves and those around us as best we can. I came to the first book almost as a compulsion, and truth be told, I drafted some of these poems at my desk at the Department of Public Health. I knew I was coming toward the end of that career, and the poetry called me back after decades. And the poems came very quickly and intensely, and I realized I was trying to understand something that had been a pivotal moment in my life. And so I'll start by sharing some of the poems from The Unbuttoned Eye. What I will say, though, is that what I'm realizing in the subsequent collections is that by being a queer man in my 60s, like many of my generation, the coupling of eroticism and death was there right from the start. So as a kid in my 20s, there was always the association of illness and death with those I desired. And that plays itself out in a broader way as I come into my older age. The first poem is set in Maine. There was actually a time when in many states and many communities, HIV was considered something that would not come here. It was something that would happen in New York, it was something that would happen in San Francisco or Chicago or Miami, but it was not coming here. And then when I was living in Portland, there was the experience of the pandemic coming closer and closer. Font. I like your blonde curls in bar light. The silver foil peels from a beer. There's a little ocean in your green eyes, a lot of sad. You talk about the drive down from Skowhegan, pulling over twice so he could heave. A long day of waiting at Maine Medical, beloved backbones, a constant reminder the body once had weight. I take you to my room, the Motel 6 in Portland. You whisper how he's lost the strength to walk, so for weeks you've carried him like a child learning a waltz. You tell me how, lifted from the bed, he places lesioned soles on top of your feet, how you walk backward toward the bathroom, how in all those weeks you haven't cried. You roll white socks, slip them into Reeboks. After apologetic sex, I tell you, get up. Towering, I tell you, put your feet on mine. Arms wrapping shoulders, cheek against chest, I walk us to the motel window, listen to your jag of breath, whimper of weeping, for a man I'll never meet. I memorize the font of a red 6, the cigarette smell of your hair. So those early years of the HIV pandemic collided with a real celebration of queer identity and queer sexual expression. One thing that happened through public health in many major cities across the country was the shutting down of bathhouses that were frequented by queer men. And when I was thinking about those environments, I was thinking about sort of where desire originates. What are the associations with experience in our childhood? Bathhouse without ceilings. Red lit hall, open doors, tiny rooms without ceilings, pipe, flat pulse black. Belly down, men arch toward webs of LED stars. Silent language written on cheap sheets in tooth mark. Bare feet shuffle toward terry towels, eyes on backs adjust. An underlit face at the end of the hall sits staring. Squeak of cot, the shrimp of toes, cell phone glow, lips moving. I remember a double-skin tent, silver teeth, a zip of long ago, the slip of sleeping bag down, a good-looking kid in a tent at camp, flashlight held under his chin, jawline shadow, the lure of forelock, the way he kissed. And the next three poems, I think what I was trying to understand was the intensity of proximity to illness. The scenes in hospitals, the scenes at home. The third poem, one of my first volunteer assignments was as a buddy in the buddy program at AIDS Action Committee, where volunteers were paired with men and women who were at the end stages of their life. And following that through with them. Breaking the fever. The tender bend of his reflection inverts in chrome, a kettle boils. In convex, Robert peers over a shoulder, his face cracks in carnival glass. I drape a warm towel over the newel of his head. Steam rises, a robe puddles, revealing wing bones of a fever. Gel cap foils, bulged and broken, folded back, torn by a stainless fork. Part of that era was also that men's lovers and husbands were not allowed often in the hospital room because based on hospital policy, they were not considered family. Cage. Did your green eye look for my brown eye as your life, your unchecked watery shit ran out? Did you wonder where I was? Did your thumb slide the mortared groove of a cinder block wall, remembering through thick paint the living line of my jaw? Did your breath break as mine does now, knowing you were wet, alone, caged, not in my arms, not under my whispering hand, counting your ribs, slowing your heart? 89 tears. Too young, buddy, I volunteered in corner rooms of stainless IV stands, sipped tall drinks of water through a straw, pretending swallows were uninfected tears. What entered the eye was upside down, the cryptococcal droppings of birds. When it got too ugly, spackle of cinder block mint green, yellowed casings over fluorescent tubes, any sign to stare at. I left the exhales of great teachers in hallways of overcrowded zipper bags. They taught decline in fast forward. I knew too much, and no one never carried flowers, though I noticed Robert's pale lilies, stems in cloudy water rolling on tray tables. I lost the names of mentors without trying. Scholarly, silent, ageless regardless of their age. Folded pillowcases monogrammed, while lovers said goodbyes, I stood alone in hallways. I was a bony shoulder, the damp man too tender to be touched. I read messages on caked teeth, scraped candida letters from blank tongues. In my sleep, I heard the sound of zippers, tripped and stumbled over cast-off leather, hoped that someday there would be a little rip to let me through. So having gone through that journey, I found myself turning, I think as many writers do, to family of origin and what were the lessons of intimacy and love within the family and with our parents. And so my parents are very much present in the Heavy of Human Clouds, which is only just about a year old now. And what that also does for me is in this collection is it claims my own family of choice. I am blessed with, February will be 36 years with my husband. And the second book really turns to the lessons of that intimacy. What I would say also, and I'd be welcome talking about this at the end of the reading, is I really believe that if the HIV pandemic had not happened, we would not have gay marriage. I really believe that on some level, that it was through that horror and that trauma and the visibility of the intimacy and the connections and the legitimacy of the relationships that something was propelled. And then there's your day-to-day life. I'm reminded of what I've forgotten. Squirrels scatter nut chunks from the giant hickory tree above the drive. Walking the dog, you remind me of little things I've failed to do. I hold a braided lead. You slip on bitter shell. Could you sweep this up? You have asked. The oven heated to 350 after dinner's done. You want this on? Bedroom windows as we leave the house. You want these open? Back door unlocked the morning after I'm home late. Could you do something about that? I answer, apparently not. I've learned a few things over years. The toilet seat is always down, the 3-ply paper over, not under. Lies have consequences, and more than one chest beats. On our walk, you stoop to pick up shit. Fresh shaved head, spots of red on your fair scalp. I'll miss the reminders, so please don't die. I have never brushed a bath. Nothing will be swept. Meals will burn. Wind and rain will pour through every opening in the house. Glass picture frames exploding in the hall. My bleeding fist. The sink filled with coffee mugs rot in the fridge. Even my body will smell different if you go. And the second poem from The Heavy of Human Clouds, actually the next two, I'm finding that in addition to family of origin, that my path is leading me toward an examination of nature in the context of aging, and how the lines that we imagine are there between this thing we live in and the external world are not as clear-cut as we were told. So, the shortest season. I gather scarabs from giant marigolds, white rugosa roses. Copper-winged, iridescent-headed, paired beads mate between bedsheet petals. Picked off like blackberries, life trembles, frantic between knuckles, rebellion in a closed fist. I drop beetles in a bowl of soapy water. The legs of jewels stop moving. This is the shortest season. Imago, winged and bright and hungry. I name it remnant. On my walk, I pass Frost Farm, Maine sassafras leaves, fairer than summer, tender, pulled and chewed. The abandoned homestead, empty can, serrated edge pondered against a wrist. My teeth are green with walking. I pass wild asparagus, smear bear prints into shoe, stop beside a wisp of skin caught in barbed wire rust. Young men hooked on fences, my breath in gaps between bone. In my life, I've seen queer things moving, shadows of outstretched ribs, sons, old friends, the cattle scraped from muscle. I push a gate, take the light-haired patch from wire, let phantoms pass as if they're alive. The skin is not from a cow. I name it remnant. The white-tailed deer jumps and misses the mark. The dead dog hunts for what yanked loose. Burned closet full of clothes. I wear a spotted wrinkle. A quiet breath blows beyond the fence as fiddleheads unwind to fern. Listen. High-pitched calls. Boys that left the farm. We've all got our stories of our mom and dad. And some of the most remarkable moments, strangely, with my mother were toward her death. She received a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer and knew that time was very short. And she leaned into it like nothing I've ever seen. She opened to her death. And she did everything. She met with the woman who was going to preside over her service because she wanted to tell her about her life. She gave my son her wedding ring for his future wife. He was 10 at the time, and said, "Don't you give this to some floozy." She told us to use the casseroles frozen in the freezer for her wake. That was the line. And in an extraordinary thing, she called my father and her best friend Rosemary to her room and said, "When I'm gone, you two need to get together." And my father and Rosemary were together for 16 years after her death. So, her recipe passed down to me. 1, I cook in bulk, bolognese, fresh onion split, tears inhaled, spoonful of oil, root bulb rings, transporting meat in time to mother's kitchen. The meat, chopped basil, pepper, and always a tiny slice of finger. 2, I cut grass around tomatoes as the scarecrow owl lolls on a post. Everything maintained. I mow through hot light, taste my salt, thick sauce, call back adolescent onions. I weed a life living in cast iron. 3, droplets make their way onto her towel. She asks for a Band-Aid. My hands are small, but hold. Peel the tabs and wrap, she tells me. You're good at healing. You should be a doctor. Eat more. When riptides took me out. Bottles with the cap on, drifting on a sea where nothing sinks and nothing opens. Oceans poisoned by a drink of water. Press on fingernails, surf in curls along the shore, plastic swirls in eddies of vast, muzzled phantoms bobbing clear and dented, winking in the light that was. Breath of rise and fall, rippled six-pack rings. Once, I flapped arms toward Mom as Penobscot riptides took me out. She waved from shore. Didn't realize. I flailed. Loss, a shade of summer. Salt's taste is green. So my family moved about every 10 years. My father was devoted to 18th century houses that were falling into the ground. And so we moved and restored one, and then moved and restored one. Restoration. And I would say before this one, because it'll go into the story that I shared about my mom fixing her up with her best friend. Restoration. On the floor of the pantry beside cans of cranberry and creamed corn, I sweep a pepper of droppings, arrange them in the letters of my made-up name. In mouse pellet calligraphy, I spell "was here," build a castle of vegetables, a moat of lentils, a world in nap time, nuzzling a stuffed animal. My father, in the beehive oven, is pulling bricks. He holds them like heads of infants, calls work restoration. Crumbling plaster scrubbed from his walk-in fireplace, the ash that lines his beehive. He carves and replaces the dentile molding of his mantle, carefully shaves each cherry wood tooth with a chisel. The beehive never bakes a loaf. Our house is filled with hammered iron, cooking tools of dead people hung on wrought iron hooks along the crane. Morphine and cut grass, Floating on hypnotics, she felt her world narrow to dandelion, watched the wailing chair beside her drip dry and brown. Dad took her hand and whispered, "It's going to be noisy a little while," and left to mow the lawn. "I love the smell of cut grass," she replied to God. Light as feathered seed, she opened over the meadow of a thigh, softly cast off her bone chamber. Little Pills. After many renovations of 18th century houses, farms without new kitchens, pots scoured in a bath, family meals in portable freezer tins, my mother removes the canopy of her cherry four-post twin, determined to die with a view of her work, the perfect edging of the ceiling paint. I ask her, "How much time, you think?" She shrugs, "Not much," and sends me back to the office. "That's too many days you've missed." I hear the deathbed story from Mom's sister Patty, how she called Dad and her best friend to the room with perfect edges. "I'm going, and when I'm gone, you two should get together." Rosemary blushes. My father gazes through an open window, the late season lawn he should mow. Months after our mother's death, my sister lets me know Mom asked Rosemary to stay behind when our father left the bedroom, whispering, "You won't have to worry about that sex thing. He hasn't done that in years." These days, my sister finds old lovers dancing in the living room, Frank Sinatra on the bows. She raises a brow, looks so much like our mother. On the shag, she's found a pepper of blue pills. They must be falling from a hole in my father's khaki pocket. So Rosemary and my father were together for 16 years, and she developed dementia and died about 4 years ago. After mother dies, most men need a lover. Father's lover sits on the Paisley sofa where my mother rested before she went to bed and died. It's been 16 years since the water ran, since my mother refused to get out of the shower because hot water felt so good. In the intervening time, my father's lover has lost her mind. She says the most beautiful things. Today, she said, "I know I love you, but I've forgotten your name." So, just this last week, my next chapbook was released for publication from Seven Kitchens Press. Don't let the title scare you. It's called Phallus Sprouting Leaves. There's more leaves in it than phallus, I think, but it's that theme that I mentioned, which is this illusion that we are somehow separate from the earth. And it's an exploration of the aging body and our proximity to the natural world. Pulp. Toward Rumford, on the way to ultrasound my pelvis, I drive the banks of Androscoggin past the desperate paper mill. Pulp gas rises in October, pine trunks stacked high give up growth. In a low-lit basement-level room, I sense stomach cells splitting. A nurse named Andy lubes my belly. "This should be warm," they say. Sliding through, Andy points out morning coffee, a bubble traveling. That dark line, that's an artery. There's something unknown in my bowel. Back home, I stew in outdoor dusk. A wood fire burns me warm. My rocker creaks and soothes. Overnight, my favorite maples dropped buff leaves and stands an X-ray of itself. Branches like nerve endings silhouetted against hemlocks. There are pleasant outcomes. The leaves have no regrets. This tree I love is young and so far from the stink of paper. In mud, I see a starry night. Children lower fluorescent worms to indifferent baths, expecting nature to comply with young desire. Like the fish, I've lost interest in shiny things, sparkling worms concealing death, lake breath blowing through hair of children. I'm drawn to saucers, below, above, a wheeling expanse. Languid as the end of summer, bass suspend over sand-spun sunfish nests. Impasto in sand through sludge, a swirl bed of Van Gogh stars. They snake to deeper waters. Urgent invitations, high-pitched squeals. Please, please, can you take a nibble? My grandniece cries because the whoppers do not bite. I tongue old scars inside my mouth, taste the rust of hooks. And again, this is what I'm discovering as something I'm trying to understand. The comment I made at the beginning of the purpose of all this is just to understand yourself and those around you. And I think that those early experiences, the HIV pandemic, gave me a perspective on death, sort of the irrelevance of time, but also how those we lose stay very present with us. Mother's breath. The sound of respiration, hot air through oak leaves, though she's been for years garden ash in the root ball of a pink hydrangea. Her tennis net strains toward the familiar, a longer line across the lawn than when she sat beside me, the hypnotic of that small machine. Hydraulic wheeze, a jolt in every train, the hiss of steam, a single cafe latte, a sizzle in every scrambled pour, her empty seat, the flushing suck of every airplane loo, the persistence of her plastic bag blowing sour on my neck. I'm coughing days, departures, as bubbles blow into an unsettled gut. The stems of her watery shrub, sealed, cocooned, where even the garden hose is on a timer. In January, my dad will be 97 years old. He's at the Montello Heights Assisted Living over in Lewiston. And we're rediscovering each other too. My father eats an orange. For all my lifting of your loose pants so you can stand, my guidance to the right in your blurry streets so you can roll a walker from curb to sidewalk, my leading you to rest stop urinals so you can take a piss. You have the power. All you have to do is curse the fucking uncooked green beans, the low-lit restaurant dining room where you can't fucking see. And I am 10, at a rock maple table, doing math homework, a language I will never understand, and there you are, sucking tangerines, judging miscalculations, never understanding why, many decades later, I can't stand the sound of men who love me eating. And I'll close tonight with a poem from the new chapbook. And again, I've repeated this, but I guess it's because it's important to me that we are part of something outside of this body. We are part of something. And I'm doing everything in this short time we have to understand that. My plot of dirt, after Octavio Paz. Spring snows pink lips, and you, beloved plot of dirt, take me to your lily of the valley bed. Rest my head on rising falls of flesh drift and mudslide. I reach for your fumbling finger. You fill my gut with pebbles, roots. Lift me from your lowland, count half-children oozing from this body in the heat. We've turned to our sacred selves, stones arranged as boundaries, barbed wire gardens protecting nothing but the early chive. Have you noticed? We're waxy, wrapped in quilts of chickerberry. Pulled into your frost heave, I'm bitter in those snows of weeks ago. Hyacinth pushes through sprigs of spearmint and other invasive fears along your flank. Flurries of white daffodil, handfuls of crystal bonnet, fingernail pinched and plucked to bless my black-tipped frostbite. I'm the only meat. Blood pudding on the broad chest of your lawn. There are no feathers here, no furs. In this verdant life, I sense the absence of flesh outside myself. You're my soil of many textures, brown and green desire, composted, light catcher of dust, my season without bees. I turn you with a shovel, tease you with a smooth oak handle. I'm perennial winter, dried herb, and ours is impending vegetation, smoke rising from a tree that doesn't grow unless it burns. Unfurl the naked fiddlehead of Christmas fern, hooded Jack in the pulpit. These petals haven't crystallized. My snows are not perfumed cherry blooms. I pray, icicle-tongued, to your peeping heads. Thank you so much. Want to talk? Okay.
Wow. Well, I think you really captured that. We are part of nature.
Mm.
That's outside us. It's all inside us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I've had this experience a few times. Again, I've come to poetry relatively late in life, and I'm on a learning curve, but what it seems to be, the words are pointing me toward is a source of some kind. I don't fully understand it. I probably never will, but it's a source, some kind of a source. Thank you. Other folks?
It all seems spiritual.
So you said it all seems spiritual. Yeah. I very much sense your presence in that front row, and I appreciate that. And that felt spiritual too. Yeah.
There's a story that I read in a book about Zen Buddhism,
Hmm.
about how the universe has a big net.
Indra's net.
Yes. And
Yeah.
some of the strings are tied and others are placed.
Mm.
And at each intersection, there is a being.
Yeah.
It is a soul.
Mm.
And each soul is reflecting the light of God and a regular soul.
Yes. Yeah. That's you're describing Indra's net. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that image. It's beautiful. Thank you.
It's all the connection with nature
Mm.
and other people.
Mm. Mm. Jefferson? Yeah.
Thanks. I like that story, Bob, where you were starting to write some of those poems in your office.
Yeah.
And it just
I gave myself permission.
Yeah, right. I love that. I love it. And I mean, it makes me wonder, like, what would the poet that you were at that point as you were like writing these poems that would then come out to be 2 books, 3 books now. And I wonder, like, what would that poet at that point think of the poet that you are now?
Wow. So the poet of 10 years ago, immersed in the HIV poems, looking at me now. Good for you that you're moving forward. Yeah. Good for you that you're moving forward. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, geez. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks.